What the heck is going on at the Southern Poverty Law Center? Let's get right into it. Well, folks, welcome back to the Nathan Hale Show. I'm your host, Nathan Hale. Today, we are talking all about the Southern Poverty Law Center. They have made their way back into the news. I feel like, this is how I feel about, honestly, lots of organizations out there. I feel like there gets to be a certain amount of time where you don't hear about them for a while, that all of a sudden they pop back up. It's like a jump scare, right? I'm kind of feeling that way a little bit about Black Lives Matter. I feel like we have not heard from Black Lives Matter in a long time. I don't know what's happened to them. I know they were out there buying large mansions with all of their Black Lives Matter money. But I feel like we haven't heard from them in a while. I feel like we have not heard of a racist incident happening in quite a long time. I feel like maybe it's because there's been so much stuff happening with immigration, customs enforcement, all that's happening. So there hasn't been room for black people to complain about racism. It's only the Hispanic folks that have been complaining about racism recently. Not that there is racism happening, but you understand my point. So maybe once all the ICE deportations die down a little bit, we'll hear more about Black Lives Matter. Anyways, we're not talking about Black Lives Matter or ICE today or any other organization. We are talking about the Southern Poverty Law Center, the SPLC, because they've just been indicted today. Well, not today, but earlier this week they were indicted by the Justice Department for some pretty exorbitant crimes, if I do say so myself. Some allegations of wrongdoings within this left-wing enigma that we call the Southern Poverty Law Center. So, a little bit about the SPLC, if you have not heard about them. I'm just going to read you off what they have on their Wikipedia page online, just so we all can get on the same page of what the Southern Poverty Law Center is. If you've forgotten what it is, like a lot of us, honestly, I did not remember what the Southern Poverty Law Center really was until they were indicted, and then I had to go research them. I was like, oh, that's right, that organization. So, the Southern Poverty Law Center is an American 501c3 nonprofit legal advocacy organization specializing in civil rights and public interest litigation. Based in Montgomery, Alabama, it is known for its legal cases against white supremacist groups, for its classification of hate groups and other extremist organizations, and for promoting anti-biased education. I don't know what the heck anti-biased education is. For the record, nothing can truly be anti-biased. Let's still be honest. The SPLC was founded by Morris Dees, quite the name, Morris Dees Nuts, Joseph J. Levin Jr., and Julian Bond in 1971 as a civil rights law firm in Montgomery. In 1980, the SPLC began a litigation series of filing civil suits for Montgomery damages on behalf of the victims of violence from the Ku Klux Klan, the KKK. The SPLC also became involved in other civil rights causes, including cases to challenge what it sees as institutional racial segregation and discrimination, inhumane and unconstitutional conditions in prisons and detention centers, discrimination based on sexual orientation, mistreatment of illegal immigrants, and the unconstitutional mixing of church and state. The SPLC has provided information about hate groups to the Federal Bureau of Investigation, the FBI, and other law enforcement agencies. Since the 2000s, the SPLC's classification and listings of hate groups and anti-government extremists have been widely relied on by academic and media sources. Until today. The SPLC's listings have also been criticized by those who argue that some of the SPLC's listings are overboard. No kidding. Politically motivated, no kidding, as we're about to see, or unwarranted, even more about what we're going to see. In October of 2025, FBI Director Kash Patel cut the agency's ties with the SPLC after a push to do so from right-wing allies of Republican President Donald Trump. All right. So that's your basis of the Southern Poverty Law Center. So you might ask yourself, is the Southern Poverty Law Center the biggest political psychological operation, the biggest PSYOP, in modern American history? Well, we're going to answer that question today. So, to really understand where the story stems from, you have to understand kind of what got the ball even rolling on all this in the first place. So, that is the Unite the Right rally in Charlottesville, Virginia. So, this was supposedly this humongous rally of neo-Nazi protesters and Nazis, actual Nazis, white supremacists, KKK members, all these different hate groups, and it was all pointed back to the Republicans for it being our fault that any of this happened, right? And I'm getting ahead of myself, but let's get into this article. So, the Unite the Right rally in Charlottesville, Virginia was supposedly the defining moment of Donald Trump's first term in office. That's right. You'll remember we never heard the end of this moment. This was the rally that, if you remember, Donald Trump saying there were good people on both sides, that line that was totally taken out of context of what he was actually speaking about. This was where all that stems from. So that's what we were told relentlessly for years and years on end by both political parties along with mainstream media outlets in the country. It was a mask-off moment in which neo-Nazis, emboldened by Donald Trump, violently rioted in the streets, killing an innocent woman in the process. May she rest in peace. That woman should have never gotten killed. This is not glossing over that at all. And we were told Donald Trump endorsed those neo-Nazis live on national television, calling them very fine people. That's what Joe Biden said when he launched his campaign for president. And about 10 million times after that, the rally was definitive proof that white supremacy was alive and well in the United States. A whole 300 people showed up in Charlottesville, Virginia for a Unite the Right rally, however many people was, right? Where have those rallies gone, by the way? You know, that's also what I'm thinking about as I'm going through this article and I'm broadcasting with you. You know, we just talked about what happened to BLM. Truly, what has happened to all the white supremacists in America? Where are they been at, right? Where are they been at? You'd think that they would be rallying the streets so happy with all the deportations happening because we're getting all of the Hispanics out of America. You think they would love this, right? You think they would love this. I'm a fan of getting rid of any people who are illegal immigrants in America, not because they're Hispanic, but because they crossed our borders and broke our laws. That's beside the point. So, but you think that they would be out in the streets? You think that every single day that went by that there was a No Kings protest happening, the KKK and all the white supremacists, they would be counter-protesting the No Kings protests. But where have they been at? When you start to realize that this was all a psyop, that this was all just funded to stir the pot of the political machine in America for the Democrats, it really starts to make sense where they've gone to, right? So all of corporate America lined up to push this message. Shortly after the Unite the Right rally, Apple announced a $2 million donation to so-called anti-hate groups, including the SPLC. The CEO, Tim Cook, declared that hate is a cancer and left unchecked, it destroys everything in its path. I would totally agree with that. There's nothing wrong with that. I'm not blaming Tim Cook for making a donation against any of that. But we're going to see where that money went to. JP Morgan Chase and the Clooney Foundation did the same thing. In fact, JP Morgan CEO Jamie Dimon said that the company would match employee donations to the SPLC. He also disbanded any advisory panel to the president for reasons that were never clear. But the SPLC got exactly what it wanted. They isolated the president, they demonized conservatives, and they received millions of donations. And they never stopped. They kept hammering the Unite the Right narrative, and they kept fundraising off of it. In fact, 5 days before Charlottesville, the Unite the Right rally, Cam Higby reports that SPLC received $375,000 from the state of Alabama. So this is an extremely well-funded group with money coming from everyone, including taxpayers for that matter. Not only are private citizens donating, but now we have tax dollars going to this. Your money, if you're an Alabama resident, your money went to fund this organization, whether you like it or not. And this continued for years. The left was obsessed with Charlottesville, as you probably remember. I certainly remember. It was talked about so much. Every time there was a political violence situation in which conservatives were the victims of it, Charlottesville was brought up. You remember this even after Charlie Kirk's murder, that was brought up as a response that, actually, the left is not the problem. Because look at Charlottesville, right? Charlottesville is just the scapegoat for anything that could possibly ever happen to a conservative, because Charlottesville was organized by the conservatives, by the Republicans, right? So nothing bad could really ever happen to the Republicans, because what the Republicans have has been so much worse, right? Because look at Charlottesville, right? Look at Charlottesville, right? So, and this continued for years. The left's obsessed with Charlottesville, as you probably remember. It's the hoax that simply never died. You can make the case that it lasted longer than Russiagate. For years after Biden's campaign video in 2024, Kamala Harris again invoked Charlottesville on the debate stage. Yes. And you'll also know that you also notice that with the Democrats, they basically stick to a story until a better one comes along, right? So first it was Russiagate, right? And then we basically forgot all about Russiagate when Brett Kavanaugh came along, right? And then we had all the, the Believe All Women thing. We had the Me Too, all that stuff, right? And we stuck to that for a while. And then Charlottesville happened. And then we stuck on the Charlottesville narrative for a while. And now we're on to all of the ICE protests, all the, ICE being a thing. So now that's the narrative they're on, that ICE is this Nazi group and that Donald Trump is a king and he's directing his minions to go and take away the liberties from Americans. You'll notice that. You can throw BLM in there at one point too. You can throw a lot of these other things in there as well if you want to. I'm sure we could make up a whole timeline of whatever narrative the Democrats have been talking about. And you can go back about the past 10 or 12 years to see this, by the way. Every single aspect of this narrative was told by every media outlet and by every prominent politician in Washington was a lie. We've known that for some time. Trump didn't endorse white supremacy. In fact, he explicitly did the opposite. But there was one aspect of that rally that, to give the left-wing activists some credit, was difficult for conservatives to explain away. There were indeed photographs of several men at the Unite the Right rally, some of them carrying Nazi flags, and a couple of them even yelled, "Jews will not replace us," which was considered offensive to leftists until about 15 minutes ago. And it was difficult for some conservatives, in the face of that photograph and video evidence, to deny that, at some level, this rally was organized, or at least popular with, a group of neo-Nazis on the right. Of course, the appropriate response from conservatives, even if that were true, would be to completely ignore the outrage. The presence of a small number of people waving Nazi flags is not a national crisis, even if they were genuine Nazis. We're a country of more than 340 million people. If we're going to allow 5 guys with Nazi flags to derail our entire political discourse, then we're never going to accomplish anything. We're also going to create an enormous incentive for the left to wave Nazi flags around and blame them on the right, which it appears is exactly what happened. That is exactly what happened, right? Exactly what happened. So, and yeah, I totally agree. This is such a small, minuscule amount of people doing this in one exact location. There's always going to be people who are racist on the internet and in their homes. It's always going to exist. There's always going to be people who are homophobic, no matter what I say. But to assume that is by and large an entire political movement, that all Republicans are like this, or even to say that all Democrats are like that either, what Republicans can blame Democrats of from time to time, is ridiculous, right? So now, very good reason to believe that at Charlottesville, what we saw was the product of a deliberate engineered effort to destroy the image of Donald Trump and the Republican Party. Again, back in 2017, a claim like that would seem pretty far-fetched to most people. After all, what are the odds that a well-funded left-wing group aligned with the Democratic Party would actually pay people to act like Nazis at this small rally in Charlottesville, Virginia? What are the odds that actually the entire event was a psyop engineered from the beginning to give Democrats a pretext to wage war against white supremacy, which of course actually means white people and conservatism in general? Well, the odds were pretty good, as it turns out. Last night, now a few nights ago, the DOJ released an indictment against the Southern Poverty Law Center, saying it funded and supported an individual who was closely involved in coordinating the Unite the Right rally. And not only that, the SPLC was funding directly or indirectly a lot of other supposedly right-wing extremism, including the KKK. Yes, according to the DOJ, folks, according to the DOJ, the SPLC and the left's preferred anti-hate group was apparently paying affiliates of the KKK. I'll say that again. According to the DOJ, the Southern Poverty Law Center, this group that was born out of basically bringing people from the KKK into the courtroom, bankrupting this organization, was paying affiliates of this organization, of the KKK. How? I swear, folks, just when I thought I've heard it all, we hear something else. Now, I remember the Southern Poverty Law Center being a thing, existing. I remember when they classified a whole bunch of different organizations that I know about, that I followed, that I was either currently or was once a part of, as hateful organizations, right? I never once would have assumed that they were actively funding right-wing extremism. I just thought they were a crazy left-wing group. But no, turns out, allegedly, they are. So, to give just one example of how they operate, the Southern Poverty Law Center put Turning Point USA on its hate group shortlist before Charlie Kirk was murdered. Here's what Charlie wrote at the time in May of last year. Quote, "The SPLC has added Turning Point USA to their ridiculous hate group list, right next to the KKK and neo-Nazis. Even former staffers called their racket a con. Their game plan? Scare financial institutions into debanking us, pressure schools to cancel us, and demonize us so some unhinged lunatic feels justified targeting us. Remember the Family Research Council and SPLC-inspired gunman went after them? They'd love nothing more than to see TPUSA in the crosshairs. Maybe someone should take a hard look at where all that non-profit money is really going to." And that's exactly what happened to Charlie Kirk. I'm not saying that the SPLC was directly responsible for that. However, when you're going to put groups as, hate groups or targeting certain individuals, and you have this narrative, you have this permission structure in place that basically says to people who are transgender, people who are in these protected groups, that right-wingers, people like Charlie Kirk, are actively trying to take your rights away, are actively trying to make you not exist on Earth. They are a hate group. They are molding the minds of children in schools all across America. It doesn't take a lot to leap across and say that that person is actively trying to take your rights away and you need to do something about it. It's just disgusting. Another example, they called an organization called Gays Against Groomers an anti-LGBTQ organization, despite that organization being entirely made up of gay, lesbian, and trans people. Once again, blows my mind. I don't know how you can be. That would be like saying that, like, me as a white guy could be racist against other white people. Like, I don't even know how I would do that, right? I can't be racist against myself, can I? Like, how can an organization that is made up of lesbian, gay, bisexual, and trans people, the LGBT, be anti-LGBT. They can't be anti themselves. Why would they exist? Why would they exist? Right? Just blows my mind. So anyways, in any event, this is a direct quote from the DOJ's indictment concerning the Southern Poverty Law Center. The indictment refers to a number of Fs, which is short for field sources. So if you hear Fs, that's field sources. So between at least 2014, so this is quote from the DOJ indictment, quote, between at least 2014 and 2023, the SPLC paid their field sources in a clandestine manner. Doing so hid the fact that while the SPLC received donation money under the understanding that the funds would be used to dismantle violent extremist groups, this donation money was instead being used in part by the SPLC to pay leaders and others within these same violent extremist groups. That money was then used for the benefit of the individuals as well as the violent extremist groups. Between 2014 and 2023, the SPLC secretly funneled more than $3 million in SPLC funds to field sources who were associated with various violent extremist groups. Examples of field sources who were secretly paid by the SPLC include, but are not limited to, the following. F-37 was a member of the online leadership chat group that planned the 2017 Unite the Right event in Charlottesville, Virginia, and attended the event at the direction of the SPLC. F-37 made racist postings under the supervision of the SPLC and helped coordinate transportation to the event for several attendees. Between 2015 and 2023, the SPLC secretly paid F-37 more than $270,000. Yes, according to the indictment, the SPLC paid more than $250,000 to one person who coordinated the Unite the Right rally and made racist posts under the SPLC's supervision. That's a small fraction of the $3 million that the SPLC is accused of paying to fund various extremists and other groups. What this means is that if the DOJ's indictment is accurate, the SPLC is probably the single greatest funder of white supremacy in the entire country. No one else is paying that kind of money to fund white nationalist rallies, which is why the SPLC had to do it themselves. Because the narrative that the SPLC creates is that the right wing is racist, that the right wing is made up of white nationalists and neo-Nazis, and all of these different hate groups are made up of the Republicans. You can't ever support the Republicans or conservatives because look at how hateful they are. Look at how awful people they are. Look at all the hate that they're turning up in America. And because really no one is funding these groups, because truth be told, folks, we've kind of moved on from being a racist country. We were once so decades ago. Now, not so much, right? We've gotten rid of all of the racist legislation in America, right? We all have equal rights in America. The newest thing that America was a phobic to was homophobic, and that's gone away as well. There's now no more legislation that keeps same-sex people from doing anything that opposite-sex couples can do. It's gone. It's gone. We've gotten rid of it. There's nothing for the SPLC to complain about anymore. They have to create the narrative themselves because they want to keep raking that money in. There's a lot of money in this. $3 million. They spent. Imagine how much money they brought in fundraising because of that $3 million they spent out. It's just disgusting. I mean, they spent $3 million. They got $2 million from Apple themselves. It doesn't. I mean, I'm sure they got far more than $3 million after Charlottesville happened. What needs to be emphasized here is that fundamentally, the SPLC is not some random one-off left-wing activist group. They are a wing of the Democratic Party in charge of engineering domestic color revolutions with fundamental narratives that they invent out of thin air. for the purpose of overthrowing conservative administrations and replacing them with leftists. Then once the leftists are in charge, SPLC starts writing memos that the FBI uses to justify violent crackdown on conservatives. For example, a couple years ago, the FBI field office in Richmond declared that Catholics were a domestic terror threat. The Catholics, folks. The Catholics. There's a lot of things that Catholics are. One thing is not a domestic terror threat, I can tell you that. You can criticize the Catholics for so many things. Sorry if you're a Catholic out there, but you can. You've got to admit it, if you are Catholic. Would never classify the Catholics as being domestic terrorists. Here's what the FBI wrote. FBI Richmond assesses that increasingly observed interest of racially or ethnically motivated violent extremists in radical traditionalist Catholic ideology almost certainly presents opportunities for threat mitigation through the exploration of new avenues to tripwire and source development. As of 2021, the Southern Poverty Law Center identified 9 RTC, that is radically traditionalist Catholic, hate groups operating in the United States. How many? 9? 9. Oh my God, 9. Oh. So similar to Russiagate, man. It's all the change in the narrative from actual issues affecting the United States to things that don't matter. The right does this too sometimes, folks. They do it too. Not to this extreme, but all politicians love to change the narrative from things that actually matter to things that really don't matter. And they send people down a completely side path. See ya, bye. Get away from here. Don't talk about the fact that we're $37 trillion in debt. Don't talk about the fact that Social Security is running out. Don't talk about the fact that we have a massive homelessness problem in the United States. Don't talk about the fact that we have a population decline happening in the U.S. Don't talk about the fact that we have any number of other issues in the United States. No. Go talk about racism. Go talk about all these other issues that don't really matter, right? It's like throwing all the loudmouth into a box and getting them to talk about completely nonsensical things when they really need to talk about the actual issues that matter in America. The FBI allies in a left-wing group writes some memo, and then the FBI will cite that memo as if it's an independent justification to launch an investigation. Meanwhile, inside the FBI, agents were writing emails about how insane it was that the SPLC was detracting the FBI's activities. So the Biden administration at the time knew what the SPLC was manufacturing: hate groups. That was the whole point. The more hate groups that the left could manufacture, the easier it would be for Joe Biden to make the stage in front of a blood-red background, flanked by Marines, and declare the Republicans represent a threat to the Republic. Joe Biden did that. We've kind of all forgotten about that, haven't we? This speech laid out the groundwork for the FBI's attacks on religious liberty, including pre-dawn SWAT team raids on peaceful pro-life demonstrators. It also laid the groundwork for the campaign of lawfare against Donald Trump, which had no precedent in American history. People are more willing to accept an authoritarian takeover when you convince them that their opponents are really domestic terrorists. This is why Joe Biden and Merrick Garland declared that white supremacy was the greatest domestic threat facing the country. All of their messaging was in sync with the SPLC. That's why, according to the DOJ, the SPLC's efforts went far beyond the Unite the Right rally. This is also from the DOJ's indictment about another field source for the SPLC. Field Source 9, F9, was affiliated with the neo-Nazi organization, the National Alliance, and served as a field agent for the SPLC for more than 20 years. F9's activities included fundraising for the National Alliance. Between 2014 and 2023, the SPLC secretly paid F9 more than $1 million. So for following this allegation, the SPLC paid $1 million to someone who was affiliated with a neo-Nazi organization. And then this informant in turn raised money for the neo-Nazi organization. So according to this indictment, the SPLC was going out of its way to ensure that the neo-Nazi group remained in existence. At the same time, they were calling the eradication of right-wing hate. They were doing everything in their power to fund neo-Nazis, and it was clear why they wanted to do that. The caption on this image on the screen reads, "The Department of Homeland Security posted this image with the caption, 'Which way, American man?' in August 2025. The caption appears to be a reference to a white nationalist book published by the National Alliance, a neo-Nazi hate group." See how this works? The SPLC wants groups like the National Alliance to exist so that they can then accuse the Trump administration of associating with them. Meanwhile, the SPLC doesn't tell you that in secret, they're not simply associating with these groups, they're funding them. It's just disgusting. Just disgusting. And according to the indictment, this happened all the time. The SPLC funneled more than $160,000 from fictitious entity to F11, who then, this is another informant, who then sent funds to various violent extremist group leaders, including the former Grand Wizard of the Knights of the KKK. It's, by the way, what a stupid name for an organization. What does that even mean? You're going to walk around and have people call you the Grand Wizard of the Knights? I'm sorry. I've always thought that, first off, never been a fan of racism in America. Let me tell you that. It's not a good look for anyone. But I can remember from a young age going to our local history museum where I grew up. And every now and then there would be an exhibit there on the civil rights movement, usually during February, during Black History Month. And they were always really interesting to go and see. And I always thought, ever since I was a young kid, who the heck would ever want to be called the Grand Wizard of the Knights of the KKK? What a dumb name to be called. What a stupid name to be called, honestly. I guess it makes sense because you got to be pretty stupid to want to go and devote your time to an organization that simply does not like black people. Kind of crazy. But I guess you got to be stupid if you want to go to that organization. It's almost like people who go and join Scientology or go and join any cult movement out there. They all call their leaders the most ridiculous things, right? Go do some research on the leader of Scientology. I encourage you to do so. They got some freaking dumb names out there for people in charge of that organization. That's a whole nother episode. It's the kind of strategy that effectively, because unless you're extremely familiar with how deprived left-wing activists are, it would never occur to you that they're doing any of it. But they feel a need to do it because otherwise there would be no right-wing hate groups. If the SPLC didn't fund them, they wouldn't exist. And then Democrats would lose power and the SPLC would run out of money. The more you read this indictment, the more you realize how shameless it was. According to the DOJ, the SPLC was paying the same Klan members it was complaining about on its website. F Unknown was the Imperial Wizard. We have the Grand Wizard and the Imperial Wizard now of the United Klans of America. In an article published on November 22nd, 2013, a day after my birthday, the SPLC described the group as a millennial reboot of what was once a serious domestic threat. F30 led the National Socialist Party of America, was the former director of a fraction of the Aryan nations and a former member of the KKK. The SPLC website contains an extremist file webpage for F30, from which the SPLC solicited donations between 2014 and 2016. The SPLC secretly paid F30 more than $70,000. This overlapped the time period in which F30 was featured on the SPLC's extremist file website. So I guess SPLC is Paul Mullet, listed on this website. I guess they are one and the same. As you can see, they characterize the guy as a neo-Nazi, and meanwhile, they're paying him tens of thousands of dollars. What the heck? What the heck? You know, I gotta say, I'm reading all of this, and I'm getting some serious respect for Jussie Smollett. At least Jussie Smollett funded his own racist coup against Republicans himself, and he didn't get money from the SPLC. Absolutely shameless. Absolutely shameless. Of course, all kidding aside, SPLC wasn't offering money to genuine conservatives who are effective at advancing conservatism. The idea was to fund and prop up the alleged right-wingers who were useful to SPLC and the left. And I suspect that soon, whether though this investigation or those to come, we're going to find out that there are unfair number of fake conservative figures, the most embarrassing and ridiculous ones, who have been getting paid by the forces they pretend to oppose. There is a symbiotic relationship between left-wing activist groups and supposedly right-wing grifters. This relationship has always been obvious. Now we're learning about its financial dimension. Is there a possibility that people like Nick Fuentes are getting paid by the Southern Poverty Law Center to be a psyop to take out Republicans? Take out Republicans in the media, I should say. Is that a possibility? Here's my feeling. I have had no idea where Nick Fuentes came from. He appears to have popped out of nowhere. I recognize he was around for a while, but we didn't start hearing about him in the mainstream until it feels like less than a year ago? Maybe about 6 or 8 months ago? Let's be real. So, yeah. I want to know who's paying this guy. I want to know where he's coming from. Because why the heck, either you are, if you're Nick Fuentes, you're either so stupid that you genuinely believe the stuff you're spewing, you're so in the cult of stupidity that you believe that the racist BS that you spew online is at all truthful or at all good for America. Or you're getting paid to say this kind of stuff. Because I hear racist comments from Nick Fuentes, and the next minute he turns around and says that Republicans have failed you, so that instead we should all be going and voting for Democrats. And I'm like, I'm sorry, wait, are you racist? Or do you just hate Republicans? Which is it? Or are you getting paid to hate Republicans? Which is it? Because if you were truly racist, you wouldn't go and prop up the Democrats, who are far more diverse of a party than the Republicans are, at least when it comes to skin color, right? They have way more black representatives in the Democratic Party than the Republicans do, let's be real. We're getting off track. So let's get back to the KKK. What exactly were they going to do with all of this SPLC money? Here's an example. It turns out that about a decade ago, there was a big controversy in Georgia over something called the Adopt a Highway program. The idea is that if you're an organization, you can adopt a section of the highway system if you agree to pick up garbage along the side of the road. In exchange for picking up the trash, you get to have your group's name posted on signs along the stretch of the highway that you've adopted. There was a similar program in Missouri for a while, which led to the creation of this sign along the highway. I believe that there is still a similar program that is in Missouri. Not sure if they would let a KKK organization on it, but I know that Adopt a Highway is certainly still a thing in Missouri. Eventually, the sign was taken down, apparently because the KKK didn't pick up enough trash. But in any event, you can see why the KKK would want this kind of visibility. It's basically free advertising for the government. And apparently the SPLC was a big fan of that advertising as well. Here's another quote from the indictment from the DOJ. Quote, F-43, another informant, was the reported national president of the American Front and a convicted federal felon for his participation in a cross burning. A cross burning. Between 2016 and 2019, the SPLC secretly paid F-43 more than $19,000. F Unknown was a member of the KKK and married to an exalted cyclops of the KKK. Folks, I'm learning all sorts of new information about racist organizations in America as I'm sitting here with you today. the exalted Cyclops truly go and walk up to someone and say, "Hi, I'm the exalted Cyclops. How are you doing?" What kind of name is that? Why would anyone want to be called that? We've already established because they're called. Oh my good God. The exalted Cyclops. Okay, back to the exalted Cyclops. F Unknown and their spouse were involved in litigation whereby the KKK applied to take part in the Adopt a Highway program. During the course of the litigation, known payments were traced from the SPLC to F Unknown, which exceeded $3,500. It's not exactly clear what that money bought, but it sounds like the SPLC was all in favor of the KKK to getting a stretch of highway named after them. This is how pro-white supremacy the SPLC is. They're all in. They won't stop until every stretch of highway is named after a KKK Grand Wizard. That's the extent of their commitment to anti-racism. As Ibram X. Kendi, aka Henry Rogers, once said, the only way to combat racism is to be as racist as possible. And the SPLC, more than any other organization on the planet, has definitely taken that advice to heart. The rest of the indictment outlines the ways in which the SPLC is accused of laundering money through shell companies to these various informants. The indictment says the SPLC set up fake companies like the Center Investigative Agency, or CIA, as well as Fox Photography, Northwest Technologies, and Tech Writers Group, and a Rare Books Warehouse. Yeah, these do sound like shell companies. The idea is that, for obvious reasons, the SPLC didn't want to cut checks out from its own account, so they may have broken the law by creating a bunch of fake companies to send the wire transfers. And in addition to that, the DOJ is claiming that donors were basically defrauded because they were donating with the expectations that they were fighting right-wing extremism, not funding it. So what does the SPLC say about all of this? Well, the SPLC is claiming that it was simply paying informants to undermine groups, and already Democrats, including Hakeem Jeffries, House Minority Leader, are claiming that the Trump administration is weaponizing the DOJ to go after its political opponents, which of course is something Democrats would never ever do that. Perfectly clean slate. So, what are the mainstream media saying? Well, the mainstream media, ABC, CBS, NBC, all their tongues, rather than report on the downfall of the self-proclaimed anti-hate group, all their tongues have been tied. In fact, only PBS reported on the indictment, but PBS's report on the indictment was vague and unclear. The charges were recited, but not explained. The SPLC CEO was allowed in for a friendly soundbite. Imagine that, folks. Imagine that. After years and years and years and years and years and years and years of nonstop talk about Charlottesville, the Unite the Right rally, how terrible all those right-wingers are, how terrible all those Republicans are, how racist all those Republicans are. After years and years and years of talking about this, they're silent. They're suddenly silent on the matter. They have got nothing to say. How convenient. These arguments, of course, amount to complete BS. When you're paying millions of dollars, you aren't buying informants. You're supporting the organizations themselves and propping them up. Isn't that right? One informant received $1 million. Another informant received what? $250,000. Right? You have these huge sums of money going out to these informants. And by the way, if these are in fact actual legitimate employees of the SPLC who are indeed trying to overturn racism in America, why would they be funneling money through a shell organization? Why would they not just be writing a check out to these people? You're telling me the KKK is smart enough to ask them to see their bank statements? I don't think so. It's just disgusting. And the other thing, folks, is the SPLC is just the tip of the iceberg of all this. We've heard about fraud happening in Minnesota when it comes to defrauding the government. Now we're hearing that that the SPLC is all a lie. What other organizations out there who are these non-governmental 501c3 organizations, by the way? What other nonprofit organizations out there are getting up to these kind of dealings? What other organizations are out there who are collecting checks from the government, states like Alabama, and turning that money into absolute nonsense, right? I want the SPLC to defend victims of racism. I want the SPLC to defend genuine victims of homophobic actions. I want the SPLC to be an actual civil rights organization that stands up for people's civil rights. And you have an organization to go to when your rights are actually infringed if you are a minority. I want the SPLC to be that organization. What truly blows my mind, folks, what we were talking about the other day. We were talking about Ketanji Brown Jackson the other day. We talked about how stupid some of her takes can be. You know, we read one of them on air, and I said that someone on Twitter posted this, and I told you that was a sitting member of the Supreme Court Justice, of the Supreme Court. And all of our collective minds exploded when I said that, because how could a Supreme Court Justice write that being a citizen of a country is the exact same thing as just being inside that country? You have the same rights as a citizen, right? Who would say that? An idiot would, right? My point in bringing up that story was that Ketanji Brown Jackson, she's the first black female Supreme Court Justice. If Ketanji Brown Jackson messes anything up, it's going to look bad on every future black female Supreme Court Justice. The first white female Supreme Court Justice, if she messes anything up, looks bad on future ones to come until you get an actual good one. The first black Supreme Court Justice, he messes things up, it looks bad on future black Supreme Court Justices. There will someday be a gay Supreme Court Justice. If that guy messes anything up, it'll look bad on future gay Supreme Court Justices. It's the same thing that we had with Hillary Clinton. Hillary Clinton was the closest woman in American history to the presidency. And because of how ridiculous her actions were, she bulldozed future women, not just Democrats, but future women in general, becoming president. None of us forgot about Hillary Clinton when Kamala Harris was running for president. And we held that against her. We said Hillary Clinton was corrupt. Hillary Clinton was a messed up person. So Kamala Harris must also be also. I'm not saying that those things are not true, but you can see where the line of reasoning comes from. Now bring this into the Southern Poverty Law Center. Because of their actions, because they have screwed things up for themselves, we are now questioning the legitimacy of other organizations out there. If there are other organizations out there, the ACLU, for example, the legitimacy of the ACLU is coming into question with this. If the Southern Poverty Law Center is fabricating where their money is going, if the Southern Poverty Law Center is funding racism, what's to stop organizations like the ACLU? What's to stop other organizations out there that supposedly fight for people's civil liberties from also doing the exact same things the SPLC is, or the SPLC is doing? What's to stop that from happening? Right? We're questioning the legitimacy of everything. And then this leads to the bigger question of, if everything's a fraud, then nothing is true. Right? Because when we don't know what's going on, nothing can be true. If the Southern Poverty Law Center was truly doing these things, why were they keeping it so undercover? If everything was above board for the SPLC, why were they funneling money through other organizations? Why were they sending so much money to these organizations? Why were they encouraging members of their organization to write racist posts that were being supervised by the SPLC? Why were they doing these things? It questions the legitimacy of all these other organizations out there. It's so messed up also because, folks, there's government money involved in those too. Alabama donated to them. I wonder how many other states have donated to the SPLC. This is taxpayer money now, right? Did they tell Alabama that their money was going to be used to go towards white supremacist organizations in one way or another? Did anyone have any idea that the SPLC even had informants in the field who were supposedly trying to overturn these racist organizations? Do we have any idea that was even happening? I cannot wait to see where this lawsuit goes. I hope that the SPLC ends up in court for this, and I hope we get answers. I hope that we can prove beyond a shadow of a doubt that either the SPLC was in fact either completely above board and completely legitimate, or that they are a criminal organization that has been using money to support white nationalist and racist organizations. Folks, if this all is in fact true, it makes so much sense. It lines up so well, right? Black Lives Matter, BLM, Buy Large Mansions. This organization was created, took in so much money for racism in America, and then used that money to go and buy the members of their organization big mansions in California and New York and all sorts of other places. Buy large mansions. Remember the week that we had that was in the Summer of Love for Black Lives Matter? That we had like a week of Stop Asian Hate. We had Stop Asian Hate. Stop Asian Hate. Asians are being hated on in America. Stop Asian hate. Stop it now. And we all collectively looked around, especially the Asians, and said, where's the hate in America for the Asians? The Asians are by far like the most well-off group of any racial group in America. They're constantly the ones you hear about getting all these high-earning jobs. Being doctors, becoming lawyers, CEOs, coders, computer programmers, all these very intelligent professions. Physicists, right? There's always the Asians. We all collectively looked around and said, the Asians are not getting hated on in America, folks. But you can see that movement was started to try and pull money in, to try and get more money coming in, because the racism was dying down in America, so they had to start up something new. And that fizzled out. It didn't work. So they had to try something different. It's just absolutely disgusting. It's just disgusting. It's fraud. Fraud is wrong regardless of who's doing it, regardless of the amount that's done. If $1 of U.S. taxpayer money is misused, that's one too many. Just like if one individual in America votes in our elections that is not supposed to vote in our elections, that's one too many. It's like a cockroach. If you find one, there's a whole bunch of other that are out there also. They multiply so rapidly. So folks, we've taken up our time today. We've gone well over our time today. Let me know what you think about the Southern Poverty Law Center. Tweet at me. Let me know what you think. If you stuck around to the end, let me know what you think about all this. I'm appalled. I hope that they end up in court. I hope that we get actual answers to what we've read today in this article. I hope we get actual answers to what, in fact, was actually happening at the SPLC. And when we get those answers, I'll be sure to cover them right here on the Nathan Hale Show. With that, folks, we will see you all next week, next Friday. Same time, same place. 6 p.m. Eastern Time. I've been Nathan Hale. This has been the Nathan Hale Show. Until next time, peace out. Bye.